All right. So my name is Derek Enslow. I am the health promotion manager at 15 Wing Moose Jaw. And today we're going to do module 2 of the Bud Out program. And this one is looking at analyzing your smoking pattern. Um, I don't think we're going to have a big group, so I'll just wait a few minutes before I get started. If anyone is there and can hear me, if you could just in the chat room just acknowledge that you're able to hear me and you can see the slide that is on the screen, that would be great. So I'll just wait a couple of minutes. I see there's one person. So, Carl, if you can hear me, see me, just let me know in the chat room to the right there. Just type in hello or something of that nature, and then we'll get started. There might be a couple other people. There are a few more registered, and we'll just wait for them. So if you can hear me or see me, just say hello in the chat box to the right. And while we're waiting for anyone else to join, there is a poll that I've made visible to you there. We just want to have an indication of who is taking part in these webinars. So if you could answer that question, what is your affiliation with the CAF community? That would be great. There'll be two questions at the end as well that you can answer just to get an idea of your satisfaction with this webinar. A bit of a disclaimer about this webinar. So the Bud Out program, it is either a group program at Bases and Wings or one-on-one with health promotion managers or specialists. What I'm presenting today is just more of an overview of the second module of that program. So this will not be like what you would receive either one-on-one or in groups at your base or wing. This is just an overview. I'll put this up at the end as well, but if you need more personalized contact in terms of help with quitting smoking, here is the contact information for your base or wing that you're affiliated with. I'll put this up again at the end, but there's a list of all the health promotion program managers at bases and wings all across the country. And so contact them if you need more personalized help. And like I said, today will be more of just an overview of the second module of the Bud Out program. Again, I'll put that up at the end as well, in case you didn't have enough time right now to write down the person in your area. So just going back to the slides. Before I get started, just a few other disclaimers. So this presentation you're about to view is a property of D&D, and any reproduction or retransmission of the slides is strictly forbidden. Perhaps some of the topics discussed here may be sensitive in nature and not appropriate for children, so parental discretion is advised. Understand that if you do have an opportunity in the chat box, or if you would like to speak, just let me know in the chat box. And if there's anything you want to say or questions you want to ask, please feel free to do that. And they will not be discussed, any questions or any things that you have to say outside of this webinar. The webinar is being recorded. It'll be available for viewing later on. So even though we have a small group here right now, it is something that can be viewed and will be on a YouTube channel that'll be advertised through CFMWS and the CAF Connection website. So we do encourage any participation. So again, any questions, chat box, just type them in there. Or I can give you access to the video and microphone functions if you prefer to ask questions in that way. So just to get started, so we're going to be analyzing smoking patterns here today, try to get at the heart of reasons as to why people smoke. There are some factors in addiction that we need to consider, being environmental, genetic, and personal. So genetically, there may be a predisposition in your family, especially if you have a history of smokers in your family, as to why you are smoking. Personal reasons, it could be something that you just enjoy doing, or it's just a function of dealing with stress or things that are going on in your life. So there's could be a personal reason as to why you're smoking. Environmentally, if your environment or the people or places where you hang around and smoking is part of the culture, then that can definitely influence your desire to smoke, especially if there is a genetic predisposition and you've developed coping strategies to deal with personal situations in your life. And if smoking is one of those coping strategies, and if you're in an environment that is conducive to smoking, that will increase the likelihood that you are going to continue, or at least or start or continue smoking. So just a few things to consider there when it comes to addiction. Um, I'll just sort of throw this out there. If you would like to answer, again, you don't have to, but where did you learn about tobacco? There's many different places where you could have learned about tobacco, perhaps at a very young age from family. It could have been in the media. I know there's not a lot of advertising with rules and regulations now in terms of how smoking is advertised. But for example, you go to an event and you might see an advertisement there, or maybe the facility where the event's being held might be named after a tobacco company. I don't know if that actually still goes on. I know it does go on related to alcohol, but that's another area. Or if you see people smoking in a movie or something like that, that could be a place where you might learn about tobacco from friends as well. If your friends smoke, then perhaps you may be more likely to smoke as well. So there's lots of places where we learn about tobacco, and that could influence later on in our life whether or not we're using nicotine to sort of cope with life stresses, for example. There's many dimensions to nicotine. So the physical side of nicotine, it does stimulate the brain, and it sort of activates those pleasure chemicals, those feel good chemical messengers such as dopamine. And when that happens, and as suggested by calling them feel good chemicals, it makes us feel good. It helps us decrease things such as anxiety. And the more and more we use nicotine, the less our brain is able to make the natural chemicals. And so therefore, in order to feel good, you need to smoke more and more nicotine, since now your brain is not making those chemicals naturally. So that's the physical side. In a nutshell, there's a lot more to the addiction, but that's sort of in a nutshell when we talk about the physical addiction to nicotine. Psychologically, we could be using nicotine as a way to sort of control our emotions. So there's emotional control that is part of that. So if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling stressed, we sort of get conditioned to use nicotine as a way to deal with those psychological or emotional conditions. And now that I'm looking at this slide, I think there's another one that I don't have in there, and that's behavioral. So, in being that smoking is something that is learned. We may associate it with something that we do in our day-to-day life. For example, having a cup of coffee and a smoke. So if that's something behaviorally that you become used to, we get conditioned to associating the two. And so when we have a cup of coffee, then we're likely to have a smoke. And then socially, smoking is very much a social activity. So if you're taking a break at work and there's other people who are smoking, then that sort of reinforces wanting to have that smoke in a social aspect. So just really quickly, I just wanted to mention those different dimensions of nicotine and how it can be and how it is very addictive, not just physically, but the psychological, emotional, behavioral, and social components of nicotine. Any questions? I'll just wait a second if there might be a question. I don't see any, so I'll just move on and sort of get the heart of what I want to talk about here today. So there's probably a lot more reasons for using tobacco, but here's a list of 11 reasons of why we might want to use tobacco. So any starting with tension relief all the way down to the addictive properties of nicotine. Um, so what are your reasons for using tobacco? There are many reasons, as we just saw. And again, going back to the list that I just showed you there, this gives sort of an idea as to why people may use tobacco. So for tension relief, you may use it when you feel nervous, you're worried, impatient, upset, or annoyed. So tobacco would be used to sort of relieve some of that tension, some of those worries, things that are happening in your life. Some people use nicotine to sort of use as a pick me up, so for energy, bored or tired, and they want that pick me up, and they go and have a smoke. Socializing. I mentioned one of the components of nicotine use is the social aspect. So when others are smoking, you want to feel part of the group, then you're more likely than wanting to smoke. Boosting your mood, a way of sort of comforting yourself. So again, going back to that physical component that's happening in the brain, if you're using nicotine then to sort of activate those pleasure chemicals. You need to keep using nicotine because, like I said earlier, the pleasure centers in your brain that are unable to produce those pleasure chemicals at a high enough level if you're continually using nicotine. Reward. Some people use nicotine as a reward for a job completed or celebrating when you're happy. So that could be another reason. There is some research out there. So the next one, food avoidance, that they use it as a substitute for food. And we hear a lot that, people smoke to lose weight because then their craving for food decreases. Pleasure, simply enjoyment. Some people just like the taste, the smell, the act of smoking. So that's another reason. Time structuring. Um, Perhaps you might, if you're waiting or there's an awkward pause in a conversation, taking out a cigarette may be a way to sort of better structure your time. Concentrating, some people say they need to have a smoke, have nicotine in order to concentrate. So that's another reason. There's certain triggers that people have as well, as they why they may reach for a cigarette. So maybe, like I said earlier, with a coffee, if you're on the phone in the car, that may be a situation that triggers you to just automatically use nicotine. And then the final one there, nicotine, the addictive properties. So if you're having, if you don't have nicotine in your system, you start to experience withdrawal symptoms like a dry mouth, headache, edginess. In order for those withdrawal symptoms to go away, then you need to have more nicotine in your system. And so that would be another reason why you might want to smoke. So in order to analyze your smoking patterns, you need to understand some of the reasons as to why you are smoking. And again, the reasons sort of run the whole gamut from physical to behavioral to emotional, psychological, social, and so forth. And this just sort of explains us a bit more as to why these things exist. So in order to have a good understanding of the reasons, and part of analyzing your smoking patterns is to understand the reasons and then find alternative strategies that replace the smoking urge. So is a best practice strategy that the Butt-Out program uses to help people to quit smoking. So we call it plotting. And what plotting stands for is first, well, it's 4 steps. So the P is to pinpoint your reasons for smoking, locating, so LO, PLO, locating alternatives to smoking, and then the first T, testing. So testing those alternatives. Part of the Butt-Out program is to sort of, again, find your reasons and then work with people to help them understand what are some alternatives that you'd be willing to do, or at least to try to replace your smoking patterns with. And then finally, training. So once you test all those alternatives, and it may take a number of attempts to figure out what works best for you. But once you find something that works for you, then you train yourself and you keep doing that over and over so that that becomes the thing that you do when you get the urge to smoke rather than reaching for a cigarette. So I'm going to go through each of those points. This is the main part of the discussion today. Each of those points in the plotting practice, or the best practice that the Butt-Out program uses. So pinpointing. If we were doing this program, say either one-on-one or a group at your base or wing, we would give you a form booklet. And this has a lot of detailed information in it to help you track your smoking patterns and then to record that and then record alternatives that you try and test. Virtually, I have put the participant handbook as a handout. So if you go to the right, where the chat room is there and where you filled out the poll, there's a heading that says handouts. So if you are interested, there's more information in the participant booklet. The form booklet is a little bit different. I don't have one of those here, but we would give participants that form booklet to use throughout the program. Pinpointing requires, so it's good to use that form booklet. It also requires sort of just the time of using tobacco. So understanding, are you a person that gets up in the morning and has a smoke, or is it something you do late at night, or are there certain times throughout the day where you are more likely to smoke? So to have an understanding of the time of using tobacco. Nailing down the exact reasons for using tobacco. So going back to the previous slides of looking at why do you smoke? What are the reasons? Is it tension relief? Is it nicotine withdrawal and so forth? Place of tobacco use. So maybe there are certain places, certain locations where you are more likely to smoke. So it's good to have an understanding of that and perhaps maybe avoiding those places in the future as an alternative. And then activity while using tobacco. So what is the activity you're engaged in? Are you working on something and then you smoke as a break from that? Are you driving in your car? So things like that. That is just sort of pinpointing what are some of those reasons why you are smoking. This is what that form looks like. So we would ask people to basically develop a summary of tobacco use. So what is the reason, the percentage of time that they spend smoking because of that reason, describing each different situation associated with that reason. And so that's the first thing that we get people to fill out. And then, and I'll get to the alternatives in a minute, we would write in alternatives as ways to, or things to use instead of smoking, and then sort of rate whether or not that was a good alternative. So that's sort of what we would ask people to do normally in this program. Here's an example of a fellow named Jim. So Jim smokes for two main reasons: tension and pleasure. So it says there's Jim's tension. Cigarettes are smoked in a few places, so at work, around home. And so with this summary, he'll be able to sort of then work on choosing good alternatives. So as you see there, tension, pleasure, or half the time is why he's using cigarettes or using nicotine. And then just describing each, well, first of all, the tension situation. So in the morning, getting ready, showing boss his work creates tension, so he reaches for a smoke. At home, the kids are shouting after a hard day, so he'll go and have a cigarette. Or on the phone, if he's wanting to ask a favor or talk about a problem, he'll have a smoke while engaging in that activity. For pleasure is the other part, which Jim reason as to why he uses nicotine. So it's in my chair after supper, talking, reading the paper. Those are the situations where he's having a smoke and enjoying that time that he has. So this would be something we'd ask participants to do when they are thinking about their reasons for smoking, and then describing how much time they spend because of each of those reasons and the situations specific to those reasons. So that is sort of the pinpoint part of plotting. Next, we look at locating alternatives to tobacco use. So what reason for tobacco use would you like to work on? So that's what we would ask people. What if it's tension, if it's other reasons that are your why you smoke, then you'd like to work on those. And then either one-on-one or in groups, we would brainstorm with the participant, what are some of those alternatives that you'd be willing to do? You could also do this on your own, or if you have a helper or supporter, it'd be best if it's like a non-smoking friend, someone you could talk to them about, why you're wanting to quit smoking, and then talk to them, and maybe they can come up with alternatives if you can't. In the the workbook, the participant workbook, there's, I think it's on page 84 to 86 in the workbook, a whole list of alternatives for each of the reasons as to why someone might smoke. So there's lots of ideas there if a person couldn't come up with their own. But again, it's best to come up with an alternative that works for you. And it may require trying different alternatives over and over again until you find something that you like. So locating those alternatives. And this is what the form for this would look like. So what is the problem here that you're looking at? And then, if it is, you're smoking because you come home and, the kids are yelling, that creates a lot of tension and you just want to go outside and have a smoke to sort of relieve that tension. Maybe instead look at, alternatives. So this one here is asking, what are some 4 alternatives to that problem you could come up with? And then sort of look at the 4 and try one a few times. If it doesn't work, then go back to your list and try one of the other alternatives. So again, recording that and keeping a record of all the reasons why you smoke and all the alternatives you want to try is very important. So testing alternatives. So now you've pinpointed the reasons, you've looked at some alternatives, and now you want to test them. So testing, it's done to see if an alternative if it addresses that reason adequately. So you may think that you've chosen an alternative that will address that reason, but maybe you're trying it and you're like, oh, this doesn't really work for me again. Although it might help to clarify reasons for tobacco use, you may want to go back and test some more. So choose the best alternative to test. So follow these steps. Excuse me. So instead of smoking, test those alternatives a few times when you have that urge. If it doesn't seem to help, go back and look at your list of ideas and test another one. So testing at this stage, if you get used to using something different from smoking and test, those various alternatives that suit you, so that when your quit day comes, and we would work with individuals who want to quit smoking to sort of set a quit day, usually 14 days down the road from when they first come in contact with us, give them the opportunity. We're not asking people to quit smoking right away. We're asking them to sort of cut back. I talked about this last week in the first part of this module. So asking people to cut back, but not quit altogether, but testing those alternatives so that, if you're smoking a pack a day, maybe you cut it back to 10. And for the other cigarettes that you would normally smoke, you're testing alternatives to see if those work for you. And this is done so that when your quit day does come, you then have more confidence that you can use those alternatives as a way to sort of satiate your need to smoke. You want to do something that feels natural, as it says there, and record those results in your problem-solving sheet that I showed you earlier. So it has to feel natural. It has to be something that works for you, and recording that and knowing what you have tried will definitely help you to sort of figure out what works best for you. And again, this is the form that I referred to earlier about recording what your problem is, and then the alternatives, and then just going back. And you have more than one problem and test different alternatives, but just going back and looking at what is and what is not working for you. So here is some examples. So again, there's a lot more of these on page 84 to 86 in the participant manual. So I've just chosen a few of them, I believe 3. So the first reason here, tension relief as a reason for using tobacco. And here are some alternatives. So the tension, it may show up as like your tense muscles, you have irritability, you're worried about something. So that's a problem. Maybe you want to try something like, relaxation, practice some relaxation techniques, deep breathing, meditation, things like that might work for you. You may want to organize days to avoid tension. So maybe organizing your day a little bit differently so that, if there's certain times of day when your tension is highest, just asking people not to pressure you during that time. And as well, getting enough sleep will help with that tension relief. Do something habitual. So maybe, trimming your fingernails in order to relieve tension, just something else. Maybe those, I know people still use them, with those little fidgets you can have on your hands, and sort of use those as something habitual that you can do to relieve the tension. enjoy a relaxing bath or shower, going for a walk. There's a lot of things that you could choose to do as an alternative to tension relief as opposed to using tobacco. So that's tension relief. Next one I just want to focus on is just socializing, which is often a big one with people who use nicotine. So you could be, have a circle of friends who are smokers. And so maybe if you're wanting to quit, you sort of prepare ahead of time a line for refusing cigarettes. You want to be positive about it, straightforward, unapologetic, and just say something simple, no thanks, I've quit. You want to be prepared. You want to be, not be tongue tied and having to think about, oh, what am I going to say now? So be prepared ahead of time. Be friendly but firm. But if you can be funny about it and just joke about it, then that's even better. But just going in with a plan for refusing cigarettes is important. Having support from others prepared. So maybe you want to have a help signal if you're at a gathering and someone says, oh, let's go out for a smoke. Maybe you have a signal to a family member or friend to sort of come over and save you, so that you're not going out and having that smoke with someone. You want to let the group know. Another way, maybe letting a group know when you go to a social gathering that you're trying to quit smoking, and maybe give them a reward uh, if they catch you smoking, so that you're not engaging in that activity. Maybe wearing a non-smoking button will make it difficult to smoke. So just again, not saying all of these will work for you, but they are alternatives to think about. And finally, use an escape hatch. So leave the situation by going for fresh air, to the washroom, until you regain control. So it's almost like taking a bit of a time out from that situation so that you can gather your thoughts and then come back and not engaging in using nicotine. And the last one I just want to focus on is just nicotine itself and the withdrawal. You will, if you, especially, if you've been using cigarettes all your life, you will experience withdrawal when you don't smoke for a while. So you need to prepare yourself for those withdrawal symptoms, for that process. So think of these 4 Ds when you start to feel those withdrawal symptoms come on, whether it's agitation, a headache, or whatever it might be. So the first D is deep breathe. So take several deep breaths, in through the nose, out through the mouth. That process there, I talked about sort of the pleasure chemicals in the brain. Deep breathing also helps to release some of those pleasure chemicals, like dopamine. So if you're using deep breath, again, if you're using nicotine over a long period of time, using the deep breath can help to release those pleasure chemicals and sort of replace nicotine. It will depend on how long you've been using nicotine, how successful you are with that, but it is something you can try. Delay, sometimes you just want to check the time, wait 5 minutes, repeat until the craving goes away. So just delaying that. Do something else to get your mind off of smoking is the third D, and then drink plenty of water. Because one of the symptoms from nicotine withdrawal can be a dry mouth. So if you drink plenty of water, that symptom, you'll sort of nip that in the bud before it does occur. So those are just examples. Again, there's more examples of the different strategies, alternative strategies you can use. But once you find one that does work, or maybe it's a couple that do work, be systematic. And by that, I mean, knowing what your situations are and which alternative works in that situation is what you should use continually and do that over and over again. Just like smoking a cigarette in those situations becomes very habitual, the alternatives will become habitual if you always are using them and use them every time and are consistent in how you use those alternatives. So train until each alternative feels natural, just like grabbing a cigarette out of the pack is natural. Perhaps going for a walk becomes natural, as a way to alleviate tension, for example. So train yourself to use those alternatives in a very systematic and consistent way, and that will help you to have some success in your quit attempt. Is there any questions about plotting, what I talked about, the best practice that is used in the butt out program. All right, I don't see any questions, so I'll just move on to the final part of this webinar. And what is also important is to get help from others. So you can't necessarily do this on your own. It'd be very rare if you could do this on your own. Not saying you can't, but it's better to have support from others. So you might want to talk to someone if you need that extra help to resist the urge. A non-smoking friend would be beneficial. Tell them what it is you want to do and explain that you might call upon them for support. So it's someone that you, when you have that urge, it's another alternative of reaching out to them, calling them, letting them know ahead of time this is something you may do, and have them agree to support you in that way. There are programs out there that sort of team people up with a buddy. This is something, I mean, since I've been doing this program, it's not something that we've done and team people up, but it may be something that we could do or that you'd want to do so you have and can get that help from another person. So find your helping, excuse me, find your helper. It can make it easier. It can be a friend, family member, to help you through that quit attempt, and just some specific ideas for how they can help you. So they can meet with you to discuss ways to deal with those difficult situations you encounter when you do want to smoke. That could be one way they could help. Be there in situations where you anticipate you might be tempted to smoke. Maybe they might be responsible for arranging to give you rewards for your accomplishments. So if you've been smoke free for a month, then maybe you get together with your friend, your helper, as a reward for being smoke free for a month. They can become your exercise buddy. So if exercise is an alternative that you've chosen, as an alternative to smoking, maybe you want to do that with a friend, with your buddy, and that will be create some more reinforcement and sort of make you accountable to maintain your quit attempt. So that is important as well. Another best practice in addition to the plotting method that I just described. So it's definitely something you'd want to consider. And here's a little form you could fill out. Your helper plan. So, you might want to just think, well, who will I ask to be my helpers, and write the names of those people down. What will I ask the helpers to do? Whether it's to reward, they will reward you for your quit attempt. They'll go, running with you, whatever it might be. And then you also want to thank your helpers. So maybe think of something you want to do for them as well as a thank you for them helping you in your quit attempt. There are a number, maybe if you don't have access or can't find anyone to help you, there's a lot of helplines out there. There's on the bottom of this form, there's the toll-free smokers helpline that you can call. And that can be someone as well that is there to help and to chat with you, especially if you're having a craving and you just need someone to talk to. So there's those alternatives as well. Here are a few resources. These are more, and I guess I've kind of come near the end of this webinar. It's a short webinar, but hopefully you found it informative. But there's a few other resources here that can be helpful, not just with your quit attempts and smoking, but with everything that's going on these days with COVID-19. There's a number of lines there that can help with SIFMAP. Is a good resource. Family information line, if you need specific information on COVID-19, those resources are there for you as well. And I did just want to bring up again, in case you missed it at the beginning, just some of the contacts that are good resources as well if you do want to engage in the butt out program at your specific base or wing. So I'll leave that up there. I'll let you look at that. And there's just two other poll questions as I close off this webinar that I would like to have you answer. The first one there, I'll share it, so you should be able to see that one. So how satisfied are you with this Demio platform? So if you could just quickly answer that question. And then the final question that I'll share with you to answer is, I feel I can apply what I learned today in my quit attempt, in my daily living, sorry. So just take a second, answer those two questions. I'll leave the list of contacts. I had to think what that was there. The list of contacts there, so that you can, if you are interested, depending on where you are, if you are interested in engaging in the butt-out program at your base or wing, these are the people to contact. These are all health promotion managers at different bases and wings across the country. So I'll just assume that you've got that contact information. Again, this session is being recorded, so if you want to go back and get these email contacts at another time, you'll be able to access this webinar online. Are there any questions before I end the webinar for today? All right. Well, you too, Carl. You have a nice weekend as well. And if you are looking to quit smoking, I wish you all the best. We will, there'll be, there's a series of webinars each Friday on the topic of smoking cessation. And next Friday at the same time, we'll be talking about coping strategies to help with your quit attempt. So look out for that advertisement on the CAF Connection website. And if there are no other questions, I will wish you a good weekend, and we'll see you soon.